Hello fellow woodworkers and welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop, and today hopefully we're going to be making a new workshop stool. Roll the intro. So essentially what I'm going to do for my new woodworking stool is create this stool, but obviously on my own and in a much larger version. Now this is a very basic bog standard, I think it's actually an IKEA stool, so I'm going to recreate the design of this but obviously make it a lot taller so that I can sit at my new cabinet that I've built. If you haven't seen my new cabinet, then please look back through the videos on my channel. It's the garage partition video where I partitioned a door in the garage and I created some cabinets. So I'm going to start by selecting some wood, and then we're going to essentially recreate this whole design. So fingers crossed it'll go okay. Let's get started. So I started by making a very basic sketch. I'm also trying a new camera angle, which I'm quite pleased with actually. The camera filming is better than the sketch, but it was just a very basic sketch, as you can see, just to give me a sort of idea of the shape of the stool, how I wanted it to look, and some rough idea on height and width. I decided that I wanted to have a 30 by 30 sort of base of the seat, and I wanted it to be about 80 centimeters high. So the first thing I did was select a piece of wood from my scrap pile. I had a few bits of, this is just CLS Starterwork timber, C16 I think. I had a few bits lying around. Some of them were wonky than others, but I had a sort of fairly decent new piece, as you can see, so that was enough. And the other one I'm going to save, even though it's a bit bendy, I'm going to save it for putting the struts across. The next thing I did, and this is going to look slightly weird, I just wanted to test the height. Now my workbench that I made is just roughly about the right height, which I do find myself sitting on it quite often. So I got a measurement from that, which was about 80 centimeters, and I used that as the baseline for the size of the stool. So the next thing I did was just mark off the wood, and I did find that there was a set of holes in here from where some screws had been, so I marked around those. When I was happy with that, I moved on to setting up a stop on my miter saw to make sure I got the right size. I then set up the stop block so that I could make sure that all of the pieces were exactly the same length. This is a homemade stop block system I put in to the workshop quite a long time ago. I'm thinking about rejigging some of this and possibly getting a new miter saw, so it probably won't stay this way. Anyway, when I was happy that it was the right size, I could begin the cuts. With the stop block set up, it was time to cut the wood, and I did something here that I've not done before, but I've seen lots of people do it on YouTube videos, woodworking YouTube videos, so I just thought I would sort of give it a go and do it, and it was just about making the cuts a bit clearer. So I've got some sort of decorator's masking tape. It's sort of thin yellow. It's much nicer quality than normal masking tape, and I just stuck a bit where the cut lines were going to be, just to help with the sort of keeping the cleanness of the cut when you've done it. Like I said, I've never done this before. It was the first time, and I just wanted to see how it looked with that tape on it, and I have to say I was really impressed. It didn't completely stop the tear out, but the cut was a lot cleaner than it would traditionally be. Apologies again here for blocking the camera. I've not really quite sussed out this camera lark yet, but I will get better, I promise you. So I put it in, ran it under the table saw, made sure it was exactly how I wanted it, and the cut, as I showed or I show in a minute, came out really clean. I was really pleased with it. So when the two pieces were cut, as you can see, they're very little cut off. When the two pieces were cut, I just compared them to each other, and due to some really dodgy camera work, you sadly can't see the top of the pieces of wood. But when the two of the pieces of wood were together, they were exactly the same height, which I was really pleased about. It's a very accurate cut. I did notice here, you'll probably see it there, a slight bowing out, but that's something I think I can deal with when I cut these legs into two. So once I'd selected the piece of timber that I wanted to then cut it down to get the individual legs, but I also wanted to narrow the thickness of the wood. These pieces of studwork timber are quite long. Look at me with a new camera angle. These pieces of wood were too wide. I think they're 89 mil wide, these pieces of studwork timber, and that was too long. So I calculated how wide I wanted the legs to be, and then I took one edge off using the table saw. Now, I do have to give out a health and safety advisory for this. Please only do this on a table saw if A, you've used a table saw enough and you're confident in what you're doing, and B, you've got the correct tools. As you can see, I used the push stick all the way through here, and I never held my fingers anywhere near the blade, because you can see from the film there how high the blade is raised to get through the wood. So when I'd done that and I was happy with how it was, I ran the pieces of wood through to get the exact legs the same size. They were pretty much perfect. There was a slight bow in one of them, which I didn't notice when it was flat, but it wasn't a problem. I got round it. The next thing to do was to put together the pieces of wood to make the sort of top frame that the legs would attach to. Again, I used some pocket holes, not a pocket hole video here, but don't worry, you're going to get your fill of pocket holes in a minute. There will be some. And then I just used some clamps, clamped it up nice and straight. And then I had a frame, a fixed frame that was actually quite sturdy that I could use to attach the legs. The only thing I would say about this was I slightly miscalculated the width, and I wanted it to be more sort of square than it was, and as you can see it turned out to be more of a rectangle, but that didn't matter, because when I came to put the seat on, the piece of wood that I had left had a split in it, and I lost some of the wood that I was hoping to use. So actually this size turned out to be perfect for what I need. I then fitted the legs to the frame. Apologies for the funny autofocus. My new smartphone camera was doing all sorts of weird stuff. I know they look slightly on the wonk here, and it's quite hard to see from this side, but they all were perfectly in line. So I attached all three of them by using some really big screws through the top. So after the legs were put on and everything was nice and level, it was time to put in the sort of cross braces or the struts. This was my deliberate mistake. You'll probably notice as you're watching that I've left the pocket holes on the outside of this piece of wood. This was actually for the legs on the other side, but actually it gave me an opportunity later to do something I haven't done before, which is sort of cover up pocket holes, which you'll see later on in the video. So when I got it in, I screwed it in, made sure it was all nice and level, which thankfully it was, got it all together, and then I was able to put the other strut in, but I'll just give you a close-up in a minute of how level it was. I learned from previous mistakes this time, and I made sure that my workbench was absolutely plumb level, which it was. So as you can see, pretty good. I was impressed with that, so that was good enough. I then moved on to putting in the other struts. So here we are, another pocket hole segment of a garage workshop video. This second strut I put in, I wanted to make sure it was absolutely level, and it took quite a while to sort of finagle this into the correct way. I sort of fettled it eventually to get it level across, as in from side to side, and obviously level with the sort of foot rest or strut on the back. It took quite a while to get it done, but once I got it lined up, I was really pleased with how it turned out. Unfortunately, when I screwed it in, it dropped ever so slightly, so on the finished stool, it's probably about 2 or 3 mil lower than the other one, but to be honest with you, that doesn't really matter. There's a slight bit of wonkiness on all of this, every aspect of this, but when it was on, I was quite pleased, so it was time to move on to the other struts. The next thing to do was to make the other two side struts, and as you can see I used thinner offcuts here. These were from the legs, and I just wanted, although they were level, I just wanted something thinner on the sides. Obviously the ones on the front and back that I've just installed are going to be where my feet are going to go. These aren't. So I just wanted to get something slightly thinner on there, and by now I'd worked out, of course, that it's much easier if you clamp the wood together before you drill the screws in the pocket holes, which luckily I learned. So it's just a case of them getting them all level and all in line with each other. I do have to say, just as a little footnote, I did get a bit obsessive with making sure this was level. I don't think you'll have seen a video from me anyway, where I use the spirit level quite as much as I do here, but I wanted to make sure, obviously with something you're going to sit on, it's got to be absolutely bang on level, which is why you see me basically checking everything every time. There was only one slight bit that was out, but I was really happy and I wanted to make sure it was level. So by now I was really sucking diesel, and as you can see I was flying along, so I decided to give it a little bit of a test seat. It was here I noticed there was a slight wonk, which I addressed later, but on the whole, A, it took my weight, which I was really pleased about, and B, it felt really, really sturdy when I sat on it, so two key goals were achieved there. The next thing to do was measure up the struts. I used a mixture of wood for this, but I wanted to make sure that they would give a lot of reinforcement, but also make sure that they would be sturdy and rigid as well. So I got them all the right size, measured them all up, cut them, and then pocket hold them. So I didn't realise until I'd already put a couple of these in that the easiest way to attach these, having struggled to attach the first one, was to obviously use the clamps. And as you'll see, I really took my time to make sure that they fitted, they were flush with the actual legs, and that they were all as level as they could be. I also am still using the leftover screws from my chicken coop. If you haven't seen my chicken coop build, there's a series of videos on my channel of a chicken coop I constructed, and these are all the screws that came out of the old chicken coop. So when I got it all nice and level, and I was really happy, I wanted to make sure everything was exactly in place, which is why I go to town a little bit with the levels. But it was very important because I wanted this to be the most straight, most level project I'd ever made, which thankfully for me, that was the case. So it was all clamped up, all screwed up, and I was ready to move on to the next stage. So with that constructed, I then moved on to doing the seat. I had this piece of scaffolding board that was left over. So the first thing I did was I planed it, and I have to say, this is only the third or fourth time I think I've used this lumberjack planer. If you haven't seen it, I've got a full review of this. It's one of the first videos I did actually on the channel, but I ran it through the planer quite a number of times, and I'd fiddled around a lot with the sort of side gate that you can see there, and I'd actually managed to get it at 100% level, so it was 90 degrees. So when I was running it through, I was getting exactly the right angle. It took quite a few goes because the wood, obviously the wood was bowed, and before I put it in the thicknesser, I wanted to make sure I had as many straight edges as I could. So because it was bowed, I sort of leant on different pieces at different times and managed to get it nice and level eventually. It took quite a few passes though, I have to be honest. But when it was done, I then was able to run it through the thicknesser to get it to the right thickness. I then ran the piece of wood through the thicknesser. Two things about this. Number one, the thicknesser did stop at one point. You can see there I accidentally has set it too thick. And the other thing is, this is my new dust collection system. I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly on here, but it is actually collecting the dust and it's working really well. So very pleased with that, and I finally got it to the right thickness. The next stage was a good old sanding. It's quite funny when you watch it like this, because it looks like it was really quick, and actually it took a long time to get this piece sanded as flat as it could be. I went through one disc there. When I got the second disc on, it went a lot quicker. I had quite high sandpaper. I think I started off with something like 120 and I went down to 80. But when I put the 80 on, it took off a lot more. It was a lot better than it had been before. So it's all nice and sanded. I was ready to move on. I then put the seat through the miter saw to get it nice and level. This was actually the first of sort of two stages of cutting. So when I did this, I deliberately left some spare on both ends, and that spare then came off when I used the track saw to get the final size. You can see here on this part of the video how bowed the piece of wood is, which didn't matter really, because the way that I'd planned on joining it, it was always going to have a little bit of a lump in it. I also used the trick of putting the tape again to cover the cuts, and actually it really stops the tear out, so I'm going to be using that a lot more in future. When I'd made the cuts, I just wanted to offer it up to see what the sizing was going to be like. As I said, I am planning to cut it down a bit to get an angle once it's stuck, but I just wanted to make sure it was about right, and I was really happy with the size and how it sat on the stool. So after I'd offered the wood up and I was happy, it was time to join it, and I used a biscuit joiner for this. I'm not sure if I've used this in any of my videos yet. I bought this on a whim because I was making some radiator covers for the house, one of my early projects before I started the channel, and it was £50. This is an Erbauer one. It was £50, and I had more than my use out of it. It's a fantastic little thing. The only criticism of it is you have to slightly move it from side to side, otherwise you have to spend a lot of time sanding down the biscuits that go in it. But I only put 3 holes in for this one. I used a mixture of that and wood glue, and then I clamped it up. I was very conscious when I was clamping it up that I didn't want to do it too tightly, because I didn't want it to buckle. And I've got these sash clamps, these Magnuson sash clamps, which are really good. So I just put a very clamp in. I didn't put too much pressure on it, just enough, you can see there, to pull the wood together. It does look slightly bowed up, which it was, but the piece of wood was bowed anyway. But I was very, very happy with how it looked after it had finished drying. There was only a tiny bit of glue squeeze out there as well. Next thing to do was to give it a good old sand, and as you can see, I've remembered to put on a face mask for this. I started going over it with a sort of 120 sandpaper to start with, but to be honest, it wasn't really cutting out all the bits I wanted to do. So after that, I changed and went for an 80 grit, and then I was able to take out all the lines. So some of the you know, the ink staining on the wood where it says where it was manufactured and things, I managed to get all of those out, and after quite a while of sanding, I was really pleased. I thought it looked exactly as I wanted it to. When the sanding was finished, I returned to the pocket holes that I'd incorrectly put on the outside. Now, I'm using a technique I've seen a lot of YouTubers use. Basically, I've got a piece of dowel which is the same thickness. It's 3/8 of an inch, I think, American. I'm not sure what the metric is, but I put them in, just hammered them in with a hammer, so they were in the hole good and tight. And then I just cut them off with a Japanese pull saw. Now, I didn't do a brilliant job here. It was a sort of success and failure, because as you can see, I left a few marks. But luckily, I was able to get those out with the sander, sanding them flat. But I was actually pleased with the plugging of the holes, at least. I thought that looked really good. Just a couple of little bits of final sanding now, and I was ready for the last stage of putting the seat. So the next stage was to cut the seat to size. Apologies if the picture sort of zooms in and out here. It's a bit weird. I'm using an old smartphone as a sort of additional camera, and it keeps sort of sliding into autofocus mode. But I got the track saw out and I took off the exact amount I thought was the correct amount, having eventually got the blade right. When I did this and got it round on both sides, I was slightly out on one side, so it did take a couple of cuts. I measured it and it was about 4 or 5 mil on one end difference in size. So all I did was I just ran it back through the track saw. I got it nice and straight, and then when I re-measured both sides, it was exactly the correct size, which was the size that I wanted it to be. But as you can see here, just marking it, it was out to start with, and it was only a few mil out, but I wanted it to be absolutely perfect. So I got the track saw back, got it to be exactly the right size, and then it was finished. And there's the final measure, just to prove it was the right size. So the final stage was to correctly seat the seat underneath the frame. Now, I did this in a very specific way. I wanted to make sure there was an equal gap all the way around the edge. So I used this little square. I'm still not sure what this thing's called. If anybody's watching this video and they know in the comments, please let me know. It's the one where you can adjust the size. Anyway, I got it exactly where I wanted it. Now, I thought long and hard about how I wanted to join the frame to the seat. There were lots and lots of ways I could have used pocket holes. I could have done lots of things, but I chose to use aluminium L-shaped brackets. I just picked them up in the special buy from Aldi a couple of weeks ago. I've used them on lots of other projects. I use them on my radiator covers. I've used them for lots of other things. They're really quick, they're really simple to fit, and they're nice and easy. So I just used 4 of them. It didn't have to take a huge amount of weight, but I wanted that flexibility of having them and being able to move them. So when I'd got everything in place, I secured all 4 brackets, and at last the stool was finished. And I was very pleased with how the brackets went on and how it looked at the end. I just smartened up the edges where it had been through the track saw, and the stool was finished. And there she is in all of her glory. Really super pleased with how it turned out. The only thing that I did, which I haven't recorded, was I just gave it a quick coating in linseed oil as a finish. When the linseed oil dries, I'm going to put on a clear lacquer that I've got just to seal it in and to make it watertight. And that will be the last thing for it to be completely finished. So here we are, fellow woodworkers, the finished stool. As you can see, it's pretty sturdy. I haven't actually sat on it yet. I'm going to do that in a second. But overall, I'm quite pleased with how it's come out. I know it's very rustic, but I deliberately wanted to do something that was that rustic. It wasn't going to be indoors. I didn't want it to be perfect. I didn't want it to be polished. I just wanted it to be functional and able to put up with a lot of getting on and off, and obviously the elements. So I think the only thing, I was originally going to paint it, but I don't think I'm going to do that now. I like the way it is. I think what I might do, I've got some linseed oil, I might just soak some oil in it and just make it, perhaps put a coat of waterproof varnish on it. I think something like that, because obviously I want it to stay waterproof. But I'm very pleased with how it looks. It's a little bit higher than I thought, but let's see. Hopefully it will take my weight. Yes. It's actually really comfortable. I did think the base might be a little bit too small, but it's perfect for my little bottom. So, very, very pleased with how it turned out. Thanks for joining me this week on the Garage Workshop. Just one thing I wanted to say, if you are enjoying these videos, if you're watching them, I know some people are, please leave a comment or any sort of feedback for future videos, or just what you think of the style of the videos, what you think of the type of projects, if there's anything you'd like us to do. So please get involved in the channel. Like I said in my original channel introduction, you know, the point of this YouTube channel wasn't to get 100 million viewers and, you know, give up my full-time job and become a professional YouTuber. That wasn't the point. The point was I want to make videos that are for me, but also beneficial for you. So if there's anything you'd like to contribute to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying watching the videos, then just let me know. It'd be nice to get a bit of feedback. Next week's video is a tool review. I've just purchased a Titan chainsaw, so that's going to be next week's video. Thank you very much for joining us. Please don't forget to hit subscribe if this is the first time you've seen one of the videos. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, click like, and put a comment. Have a fantastic week, woodworkers. I'll see you next week. Happy woodworking!